2006, Taliban insurgents resurged in southern Afghanistan, especially around Uruzgan province. Coalition forces planned a major offensive as part of Operation Mountain Thrust, aiming to clear insurgent strongholds in the Chora Valley, north of Tarin Kowt. To prepare, they launched a preemptive special operation on the night of July 9th and 10th in 2006. This action, informally known as Operation Nile, targeted a senior Taliban leadership cell in central Uruzgan. Success would disrupt the Taliban's ability to resist the upcoming larger operation, codenamed Operation Perth.
Yeah, mate, we're just manoeuvring around to the other side, from the southern side of you.
Operation Nile was a joint special forces mission. The primary assault force came from Canada's elite Joint Task Force 2, under Canadian Special Operations Forces Command, partnered with Australian Special Forces from the Special Operations Task Group. Delta Commando Company, 4RAR, served as the quick reaction force. Afghan National Security Forces provided the outer cordon. Coalition air assets supported the raid, with 2 Australian Chinook helicopters inserting and extracting the assault team, escorted by Dutch Apache attack helicopters. A US Air Force Spectre gunship provided fire support, and a Predator drone offered ISR overwatch.
We were approached by the Australian Special Forces Task Group, who were working under operational control of, as well as by Canadian Special Forces Group, for us to go and be the assault party for a particular mission, which ended up being called Operation Nile. It was to be a kill or capture mission of a medium value Taliban target, and the Canadians were the assault force in the back of the aircraft, along with an Afghan partner force. And we had Australian commandos in vehicles on the ground as a quick reaction force. We had Dutch Apaches in the air with us as our escorts, and we had American Predator and AC-130 over the top as our eyes and guns over the top.
Intelligence had identified a gathering of Taliban commanders at a walled compound near the village of Dejozi Hassanzai. The mission was to conduct a hard-knock direct action raid on the compound and to kill or capture the Taliban commander, known by the pseudonym Osami Bari. When seeing the map of the target, Humphreys realised that the only place to land his 2 Chinooks would be right next to the compound. This would ensure special forces avoided open ground from drop point to target and maximise the element of surprise.
So when I said this to the Canadian fella, the look of relief on his face was just palpable. And what I didn't know until some time later was that they'd actually looked at a couple of different countries and their dedicated special operations aircraft and whatnot, and they'd actually refused to do the mission because it was going to have to land right next to the compound. But to me, it was the only way to really achieve surprise. Now, we had a couple of aces up our sleeve, and that was because we operate a stock standard US Army D model Chinook. We don't have a great big refueling probe off the front of it, right? And as much as I would have loved to have had one a couple of times, the fact is that the Taliban spotter network was really effective at identifying different aircraft types and knowing what types of missions they did. You know, Black Hawk versus Apache versus Chinook is really simple. But then you can also get down to some detail about the difference between, say, a SS-60 compared to a UH-60. One that's designed for combat search and rescue versus utility. Versus an AME Black Hawk, for example, a CH-47D versus an MH-47D, being a special operations Chinook, and they've got the big refueling probes. Because we were a stock standard US Army Chinook, I could pretend to be a stock standard logistics supply mission. And so that was what I created from the outset for this mission, was for us to conduct a special operations air assault that looked every bit like a logistics mission until 2 minutes from target.
A plan was in place, but Humphreys and his crews had not conducted a direct action air assault into a compound before, and certainly not one in such a tight space as the compound in question. Training was required. So the Australian Chinook crews spent several nights in a remote part of the Afghani desert, practicing dust landings in tight formation, along with the Canadian Special Forces. The approach to target, the landing, Special Forces ground egress, and later the extraction, all had to be a reflex. There was no room for error with large twin-rotor helicopters landing at night, in the dust, under fire, right on top of the enemy.
The night came for the task, and we gave the mission briefing. And I remember at the end of the briefing, I pulled everybody around to have an informal chat after the brief around and just confirming some of the tasks that we're all going to do and that we're all on track. And at the end of it, I said, "All right, gents, it's going to be a cracker. Let's go." And a cracker it turned out to be.
From the briefing, the troops loaded up, and once inside both Chinooks, the ramps and ramp tongues were completely closed, giving the impression of a cargo mission only. Typically, with troops on board, the ramps are never fully closed to allow fresh air through the cabin. The formation flying of the Chinooks and the two accompanying Apaches mimicked a cargo mission. Even the radio chatter was designed to deceive enemy ground forces, making it appear that this flight was just another logistics run. Nothing to see here. The lead aircraft is call-signed Patriot 46. Major Dirk Noorderweer is aircraft captain, Captain Lockie Hayes is co-pilot, Warrant Officer Class 2 Anthony Griffith is on the left door gun, Corporal Richard Wakelin takes up the right door gun, and Sergeant Lee Maloney is on the ramp. The second aircraft is call sign Patriot 47. Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Humphreys is aircraft captain and the air mission commander. Captain Dan Cash is co-pilot. Sergeant First Class Roy Payne is from the US Army, and he's on the right gun. Corporal Tarquin Kennedy is on the left gun, and Sergeant Greg Maiden is on the ramp.
Went up and landed in Tarin Kowt, and we would normally land in a staging location. Only if you're doing a logistics task, you'll land in the cargo park, or if you're needing more fuel, you'll go and land in the fuel park. Well, we landed in the logistics park, and we kept the ramp up until there was at one stage we had a bit of a longer wait than we'd planned, and one of the Afghan soldiers jumped off the back and wasn't sure if it was for have a leak or have smoke or whatever it was. And I was like, get him back on board right now. Like, get that ramp up. We want to maintain the facade of this logistics mission. And then from there, the target we were going for was over here, and there were a number of forward operating bases up here, and we would normally depart off in this direction to go to these forward operating bases. And so that was the way we departed out of Tarin Kowt to start with. And then we made a turn to go up as though we were going, again, a route that we'd flown 100 times before, up towards a couple of other forward operating bases up here. And so we did that, and it wasn't until the last safe moment where we made a hard right turn through about 90 degrees to then head straight towards the compound. And by that stage, we're only 2 minutes away.
Two minutes out from target, the aircraft roll out on final approach, needles lined up, and an infrared beam from an AC-130 pinpoints the compound. Humphreys gives the code word to confirm they have the correct target.
And it was at that moment where I had the reality of I've got 40 men on my aircraft, and they've got 40 men on theirs, and I'm the Air Mission Commander. I better have got this right. And I was confident that I had, but that moment goes through your mind, you know. And as I said, this was our first time.
On final approach, both Chinook pilots assess their 120 to 150 foot wide and 200 foot long landing spaces. To put this in perspective, their rotors occupy 100 feet along the aircraft's length and 60 feet wide. The landings are going to be tight, alongside 12-foot high compound walls.
Grim 06, this is Shadow 1-1, checking in for overwatch, en route to compound. Quebec Sierra 7114-2188, over.
Shadow 1-1, Grim 06, copy. Overhead compound. Predator on station. Call sign Gator 2-2, over.
Grim 06, Shadow 1-1, good copy. Expect light contact on arrival. Monitor streets around compound. Report any activity, over.
Humphrey's aircraft comes into land at the southern wall of the compound. The approach is clear for him, but the lead aircraft must navigate over trees to get into his landing zone to the northeast. The landings are fast and heavy.
On our side, the compound wall was running along on our left and then coming across in front of us. So we had a 12-foot high earthen wall along our left-hand side and then across the front. As we came in, we see there's a couple of people around, and there was one fella with a rifle leaning up against the wall, and he was sitting on the ground, I'm guessing asleep. And I'm looking at him as we're on late finals thinking, man, if he hasn't heard, he hadn't moved, hadn't budged. So I can only assume he was asleep and hadn't heard the aircraft approaching at this stage. Man, you're about to get the rudest wake-up call you've ever imagined.
As the Chinooks come into land, the dust completely obscures the pilot's view of the site. These D-variant Chinooks only have analog controls and there is no automation to assist the pilots. Blind, they hit the ground with the brakes on and lurch forward as the landing gear digs into the dirt. The ramp goes down as the 35 troops exit the aircraft and straight into a firefight. Through the thick dust, the door gunners use their lasers to point the troops to the vicinity of where they were to assault the compound.
The dust was so thick you literally couldn't see a hand in front of you. And there were a couple of troops who got out the back and turned and ran so fast they literally smacked into the compound wall that it was that close. It was only about 10 metres away from the blades. And a few of the forces were literally holding the pack of the guy in front of them to make sure they didn't get lost and separated.
Reaching the compound, the team breached the outer wall with explosives and stormed inside. In the ensuing close-quarters battle, they engaged and killed several Taliban fighters defending the compound. Notably, one insurgent was gunned down while attempting to ready an RPG launcher. This fighter turned out to be the high-value target, Objective Nile himself, identified after death by his distinctive tattoos and ring. Within minutes, the assault team secured the compound, eliminating 3 armed Taliban and detaining 4 others who surrendered or were found hiding. With the troops out and heading into the compound, the ramps go up. The landing zone is hot and the Chinooks need to get out of the way as quickly as possible. They have been on the ground for 40 seconds. Both pilots prepare for a vertical instrument takeoff in a dust cloud that has reached a height of around 200 feet. Both pilots must make a vertical ascent without any visual references and hopefully pop out of the top of the dust cloud without hitting each other.
Then we went down to Tarin Kowt, which was our staging location, and when we were on the ground down there, we could hear on the radio this assault, this firefight was getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And you could see through the night vision goggles, see very clearly the laser, the tracer, explosions going off. What we didn't know was that the intelligence wasn't quite right, funnily enough, wasn't quite right for the night. So they were expecting to have half a dozen enemy within about 30 minutes arrive at the compound. Yes, there'd be 2 or 3 close personal protection in the compound and another half a dozen or so within 30 minutes.
What the assault force didn't realise was that about 500 metres down the road was a Taliban leaders' meeting taking place, with about 200 Taliban bedded down for the night.
Grim 06 gated 2-2. New activity at compound south east of objective. Grid Quebec Sierra 7131 2167. Multiple personnel exiting. Appear armed. Moving northwest. Sparkle in effect. How copy? Over.
Gator 2-2, Grim 06. Copy. 4 miles west. Slewing sensors to your grid. Over.
Grim, Gator, additional 50 plus from east. Smaller element from north converging. Enemy will have line of sight shortly. Over.
Shadow 1-1, Grim 06. Be advised, Predator has eyes on multiple contacts moving to your position.
From the sky above, the Spectre gunship advised there were 50 enemy approaching from the north, 50 approaching from the south, and then too many to count coming in from the east.
Shadow 1-1, Grim 06. IR spotlight on. Objective illuminated. Over.
Grim 06, Shadow 1-1. Contact. Elevation 4950. Large 2-story structure southeast. Grid Quebec Sierra 7132. 2166. Over.
Copy all. Elevation 4350. Grid Victor Uniform 09501870. Over.
Nav tally 20 plus hot signatures closing from southeast. Same structure, same reference. Over. Confirmed. GTF-2 clear of blast zone. Track solid, target yours. Gates closed. Over. Grim 06, cleared on. Over.
Grim 06, rifle.
The gunship began pounding the enemy that was now surrounding the area.
We were meant to go back and pick them up in about 40 minutes, and that turned into an hour and a half and 2 hours. And one of the as we're waiting, and the firefights is getting bigger and bigger, and the guys are on the radio just saying, "Hey, you guys are going to be able to come back in this?" And it's like, "Yes, we will come back and get you. We will come back and get you." And one of the guys, Lockie Hayes from the other aircraft, he came over and he said, "Boss, are you mad? We better not be going back up there." And I said, "Mate, I know, but there's 70 men up there that need our help. And we put them in and we're going to get them out. It's we're their only way out. And so when they call, we're going to go. And I need you to go and get back in that machine." And to his absolute credit, he did.
Finally, the call comes in for the extraction. Without hesitation, the Chinooks head back down to the extraction point where the firefight continues to rage. The moon had gone down, and the overcast sky left the pilots without any ambient light. Their night vision goggles are useless. Without forward-looking infrared or terrain-following technology, they head in toward the extraction point on analog instruments alone, staying low enough to be tactical, but high enough so as to avoid the terrain.
And on the way in, there was a radio call. I can't remember the sequence of this, but there was a radio call at some stage saying that the Taliban knew we were coming back and they were setting up an ambush for us, and it wasn't safe for us to come back. Everybody ignored it because they knew we needed to get these guys out.
approximately 15 minutes away, a 7-vehicle convoy of Australian Special Forces, the Commando Quick Reaction Force Platoon, had been waiting in a staging area. Upon getting the call, they raced toward the embattled objective, securing a landing zone for the helicopters and establishing a blocking position to cover the withdrawal of the assault team. The Australian commandos fought their way to high ground just a few hundred meters west of the Taliban-held compound, essentially interposing themselves between the enemy and the escape route. Once in position, they laid down withering suppressive fire with heavy weapons. An Australian on the Quick Reaction Force described seeing the AC-130's IR spotlight, the hand of God, illuminating targets, and hearing its guns thundering as the commandos arrived amid the flashes of explosions in the darkness. With a corridor temporarily opened by supporting fire, the order was given to extract the assault force. Around 3 a.m., the 2 Australian Chinooks were coming in. One of the 2 Apaches that were accompanying the Chinooks took a hit and damaged a hydraulic line and had to retreat to base. On the now secure landing zone, the commandos had created a horseshoe of vehicles and a soldier spinning a buzzsaw, a bright infrared signal to bring the choppers into the landing zone. Rocket-propelled grenades were flying under and over the incoming aircraft, but miraculously, none found their target. 20 feet from the ground, the enormous wash of the rotor blades once again created a huge dust storm. As they hit the deck, all hell broke loose.
Laser, tracer, heavy machine gun, rockets, you name it, between the aircraft, the front of the aircraft, the side of the aircraft, just going absolutely everywhere. And we're sitting on the ground, and we seem to be sitting there for a while. Now, it's a pretty big aircraft, right? It's pretty big. And despite the size of it though, when you've got 30 plus troops running on or running off the aircraft, you can hear all these feet coming in and out of the aircraft, and you can feel the whole aircraft have a little bit of a rumble as all these people get on and off. Nothing. Sitting here, there is the most amazing fireworks and laser show you've ever seen going on outside, and inside the machine, silence. Nothing. And I looked down the companionway. Right. I said, Greg, are those guys getting on? He said, oh, they look like they're having a look at the fireworks show. I was like, well, can you please, in your nicest voice, encourage them to get on board the aircraft? Anyway, very shortly, there's a whole bunch of action, and the guys are jumping on board the aircraft. And just going, oh my God, wow. Now what I found out later was that the 70 troops, there were 40 odd commandos, right? There were 70 assault troops. We had the AC-130 overhead. The AC-130 had already gone Winchester out of ammo on 105mm rounds before we got back there. So the concern for the assault force was that if they got on board these aircraft, even though we were the only way home for them, they would be leaving these 40 troops significantly outnumbered. They were already outnumbered, right? They were already outnumbered pretty much 2 to 1. Fire support in the sky had already gone through at least half its ammo. And now, 2/3 of the force on the ground was about to get on board a helicopter and fly away. So the reason these guys weren't getting on board the helicopter wasn't because they were looking at the fireworks show. It was because they had grave concern for leaving the commandos behind, and that the real possibility they were going to be overrun. It was a very real possibility it was going to be overrun with us on the pad, let alone us off the pad, 70 fighters off the pad, and now 40 commandos left by themselves.
The 70 troops eventually boarded the Chinooks. Patriot 46 was about to take off when the pilot noticed a commando in front of him, pointing to a group of Taliban about 100 feet to the left of the aircraft, raising RPGs ready to fire. The side door gunner opened up with his minigun on the threat as the Chinook took off, where the gunner at the ramp continued the engagement. As they flew away from the extraction point, another group of Taliban on the right-hand side of the aircraft engaged, and the door gunner returned fire.
That other aircraft, Dirk's aircraft, with 40 people on board, very, very nearly flew into the ground on the way home because of the challenging light conditions. And that decision of mine to push them well beyond their limits played on my mind for a long time, I've got to say. But we both made it back to Tarin Kowt, and the crewman got out to do a visual inspection of the aircraft. We had 2 aircraft walk around each aircraft. 2 of them walk around twice. And they said, "Boss, you won't believe it, there's not a single bullet hole." It's like, you can't be serious, mate, there's no way. Look again. And they looked around again, and they came back, both aircraft, and said, "No, there's no bullet holes. We didn't cop a single shot." Just incredible. And the blades were still spinning, so we thought we'll check the blades when we get back to Kandahar. But for the fuselage, everything's intact. And there was one casualty on board. There was one KIA of the assault force, and there was one other casualty that needed attention. And they wanted us to keep going back towards Kandahar to get them back there. But at this stage, the sun was just the first pieces of sunlight coming through. And so now we're at that really awkward stage of nautical twilight where it's both too dark and too light at the same time. It's too dark to fly without NVGs, and it's too bright to fly with NVGs. And indeed, we were now going to be going through some quite mountainous areas for us to get back. And I said, "Guys, I'm sorry, we can't fly. We've got to wait another 20 minutes. So there's enough light, and then we can get through the hills."
Once the Chinooks departed, the 24 Australian commandos, plus a few support attachments, were effectively alone on the battlefield. They were deep in insurgent territory. The enraged Taliban force turned its full attention on them. The commandos had taken up a defensive posture near the landing zone. They used their 7 vehicles as cover. For a time, they fought back to back, holding off waves of attackers in every direction. It was likened to a modern-day Alamo. Enemy fire grew unbelievably intense. Dozens of RPGs streaked in, and continuous machine gun and mortar fire rained on their position. The AC-130 gunship remained on station as long as it could, dropping ordnance, danger close, to keep the swarming insurgents at bay. Spectre's infrared scope counted up to 300 enemy fighters maneuvering around the Australian perimeter. The gunship crew radioed that Taliban fighters were so close that the IR targeting sparkle was on the commandos as well.
1,100 meters.
The insurgents were intermingled with the Australians' location. In repeated blasts, the AC-130 expended all of its ammunition, going Winchester, as it strafed the attacking Taliban masses.
Tusk 2-2, Wizard 01, flash, 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 emergency retask, break XCAS, priority TIC and RC South, vicinity of Tarin Kowt.
Wizard, Tusk 2-2, copy immediate retask, standing by for grid and routing.
Tusk 2-2, Wizard 01, proceed direct IP Holland, check link 16 for track, target area active TIC. Elements from JTF-2 are pinned down. Push tactical frequency uniform 239er, Dayline 4. Contact JTAC, call sign Shadow 2-1, over.
Radio set, link green, over.
Shadow 1-1, Tusk 2-2, checking in. Single B-1B Lancer, direct IP Holland. Angels 2-0, request situation update, over.
Tusk 2-2, Tusk 2-2. Shadow 1-1, link good. Troops in contact. Immediate priority mission, northeast Tarin Kowt. Breaking contact, retrograding for helo extraction. Taking fire!
Shadow 1-1, Tusk 2-2, loud and clear. 30 miles out, inbound to your position. Ready to copy target data. Send it, over.
Tusk 2-2, Shadow 1-1, Type 3, immediate 9 line. Target, mass infantry. Grid, Quebec Sierra, 7130-2166. Friendlies 400 meters east. Danger close, cleared hot, over.
Shadow 1-1, Tusk 2-2, copy grid Quebec Sierra 7130-2166. Friendlies 400 meters east, danger close, 5 minutes out. Abort code Octagon, over.
After about an hour of close combat, around 4 a.m., the Australian commander realised his force could not remain without being overrun. He ordered a fighting withdrawal. The commandos mounted battered vehicles, covering one another as they leapfrogged back and fired at the enemy. Meanwhile, Taliban fighters on motorbikes sped ahead to block the road and set up ambushes. This triggered a running firefight, stretching across several kilometres through the pre-dawn darkness. The Australians faced continuous ambushes, machine gun teams on rooftops, RPG ambushers behind walls, and gunmen running alongside their convoy at times. One commando described RPGs bouncing off a vehicle's windshield without detonating by sheer luck. Another recalled enemy bullets pinging the side of the vehicle as he thought any moment could be his last. At one point, an SRV was hit and temporarily disabled. The troops had to dismount under fire, then remount and continue after beating back the assaulters. The close air support remained critical.
Shadow, Grim 06, bingo fuel, off station east, flight level 150, clearing corridor for Tusk. Good luck, over.
Tusk 2-2, Gator 2-2, flight level 130, east to target, you clear in. Multiple contacts and trees, parallel friendlies, grid, Quebec Sierra 72062110. Recommend 6-weapon ripple, north-northeast from target. Laser code 1688, over.
Gator 2-2, Tusk 2-2, copy laser code 1688. Programming 6 GBU 38s, south to north. Release heading 350, over.
Tusk 2-2, Shadow 1-1, friendlies east, clear of impact. Cleared hot, bring it in, over.
Shadow 1-1, Tusk 2-2, copy, slave to laser, wings level, Angels 1-2, 20 seconds to release, over.
Tusk 2-2, cleared hot, over.
After the AC-130 had to depart, low on fuel and out of ammo, a USB-1B Lancer bomber arrived overhead.
The security
The crew of the B-1 dropped 500-pound GPS-guided bombs on enemy positions further down the withdrawal route. These strikes obliterated one compound where a cluster of Taliban had gathered and hit other targets threatening the convoy's egress. These precision strikes helped punch a hole for the Australians to escape. As dawn broke around 5:30 to 6 a.m., the surviving Taliban began to disperse. They had taken heavy casualties from the airstrikes and the hours of fighting. After roughly 5 hours of continuous combat, the Australian Commando Platoon finally fought its way out of the valley to safer terrain. They rendezvoused with a relief element from the Australian SAS 3 Squadron, which had driven out from Tarin Kowt to assist and bring supplies. Exhausted and low on ammunition, the floors of their vehicles littered with spent brass, the commandos were astounded. Everyone in their unit was still alive. Not a single Australian soldier had been killed during this monumental battle. Given the volume of fire and odds they faced, this outcome seemed almost miraculous. Several commandos were wounded by shrapnel or grazing hits, but all were evacuated. By 7:45 a.m. on July 10th, the QRF convoy rolled back through the gates of Forward Operating Base Davis, Tarin Kowt, and one shot-up Bushmaster even returned on its wheel rims after its tyres and axles had been destroyed.
Here we were, that was our first hit out, that was only their second hit out. And so, yeah, it was pretty incredible to know that the level of training that we go through can be adapted, can be applied in pretty much the worst of circumstances and come out with good effect.
Thanks for watching. Our videos are researched, written and produced by a small team of filmmakers dedicated to bringing you accurate military aviation history from around the world. Please consider supporting us by joining our merch and members site for early access, bonus content and merch discounts. Or become a YouTube channel member for early access, or simply hit subscribe. Your support means everything.